Hi there everybody and welcome to this week's Art of Procurement powered by SIG. And before we start, just a teaser, I want to let you know that very shortly we're going to be launching a SIG podcast on the Art of Procurement network. So Dawn Tierra, the CEO of SIG, has been really hard at work over the past couple of months recording a number of different shows. So as soon as we are ready to hit publish, it's going to be really soon, I'm going to let you know. On to today's guest, and today's guest on the Art of Procurement is actually my friend Johan-Peter, or JP Teppala. JP is the CEO of the US operations of Sievo, and in fact, as you hear about in the pod, this week he's finally making the move to live in the US from his home base in Helsinki in Finland. If you're not familiar with Sievo, they're a procurement analytics company. They encompass spend analysis, spend forecasting, savings management, and also contract management. And the core of our conversation today really focuses on how procurement can be the driver of what JP termed radical transparency and doing that through data. And so we discussed three key themes. The first is transparency through spend analysis. Second is transparency through realized savings. And the third is transparency through predictive analytics. And in my mind, as you listen to the show, these are really core building blocks for me for any catalytic procurement organization. It's definitely hard to make a mark if we don't have good data. And so as we go straight into the interview, I started by asking JP, did he choose procurement or did it choose him?
I think it's a very good question, Phil. I think in my case, it's more like procurement chose me that I chose procurement. It was 12 years back when I was approached by two guys who have 3 years before that time established a company providing procurement analytics software. And just before I joined, they have got two big clients, and I was basically brought into the company to make sure that we will get our application implemented well for these two big clients. Back in that time, I didn't know much about the product itself, and I remember that on the second day at the office, I was running a workshop with a client, another one of these two, which happened to be the largest chemical company in Finland. And already at that time, I realized that what we are doing there is something absolutely great. That we can really help the persons, the procurement organization that we talk to within their work, make them succeed in that, and really provide them a really, really transparent information about the purchases and data they have. And I got so fascinated about that's how procurement was.
Yeah, you found it and you never left, which happens to a lot of us.
Yeah.
I know that from some of our discussions, before we actually hit the record button today, it's actually a pretty busy time for you. You're going through a transition. It's something I did a long time ago, although I didn't do it with my wife and kids and animals, I don't think, in tow. But you're in the process of moving over to the States from Helsinki. How's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for asking. I do have a family with 3 kids, ages between 6 years and 2 months, and then dog as well, that are moving to US. So it's quite far from a simple tax, actually, that I have realized over the past half a year.
Sounds so easy. Well, I don't think it doesn't even sound easy. It sounds hard, and I'm sure that's the reality.
But if you really don't think about it from the beginning as a kind of a complex task, it really sounds as simple. Yeah, I'm just moving, but right. Moving from a different country to another, it's really it's a big thing. You need to find school, you need to find house, you need to find quite a few other things, and the things that really they need to be ready there when you actually move to your new location. And then at the same time, you just can't give up on those on your old home. So it's what do you do?
Yeah. And you still got to keep working. You can't just.
I'm working at the same time. Yeah. So it feels like you are doing a work on the days and in the evenings on the normal stuff, and then you are doing kind of the extra work on the move after that. And so it has been a process, quite long as such. But now I'm very happy that my family is actually moving now next week. So it's coming to an end, and I'm looking forward in settling ourselves to Chicago with the family.
Why Chicago? I know you told me beforehand that you picked Chicago. It seems like if you had, and now I'm not talking down on Chicago because I actually love Chicago as a city. And maybe I'm just talking from I always like to go to places that are warm. But there's some warmer places in the States you could have picked.
That's very true. But for example, if I compare to LA, that would have been too hot for me. Definitely a too hot place to live in. So kind of the weather in Chicago is actually, it resembles very much about the weather in Finland. So really makes me feel like home there, right? So I'm not too scared about that.
No.
And kind of for the Chicago itself, it's good to hear that you love the city. I do that as well. Yeah. I love the city a lot. And of course, from a business perspective, Chicago is a place where there are lots of Fortune 500 clients out there. Mm-hmm. And for those ones who are not there, it kind of provides a very good reach for them through a good connections and so forth. And then, of course, Chicago is a well-known procurement hub in the US. So it provides us with a great access to local talent and partners. Exact. But hey, for you, why did you pick LA?
Yeah,
what made you move there?
So honestly, I think the weather was an attraction. We lived, so in the States, I've lived in Detroit for most of the time, but I've also lived in Ohio and in Connecticut. Okay. And LA was always a place we enjoyed coming to for vacation. So I'm always a little bit of a mover in terms of I like to go and experience different places. So we just thought, why not? Yeah. And we've really enjoyed it. You know, it's if I had to drive in the traffic every day, I don't think I would want to be here. You know, there's no amount of sunshine that makes up for having to commute 3 hours in each direction. And I really have no idea how so many people do it. But you know,
I have heard some horror stories about.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. You know,
horror stories about the traffic in LA.
Yeah, I have a client who is only based about 40 miles away from me. But if I was to drive that in the morning, it would take me 3 hours. So I travel there. You know, I stay overnight because the drive would be too much. So
oh wow, but 3 hours is a lot.
Yeah, but we don't regret it for sure. What I want to do actually is talk a little bit about Sievo. So I know that you're coming over to lead Sievo in the States, and while I know of Sievo, just I think from some of my background, I'd love if you could share just a little bit more about who you are, kind of what are you known for, and just a little bit about the company, really, just so that listeners have a little bit more context.
Absolutely. So Sievo is a procurement analytics software company, providing software for procurement analytics. Helping our clients to get transparency on their data, on past spending, their savings initiatives, their savings projects, their realized savings, as well as then giving them a possibility to do forward-looking forecasts on the prices, quantities, commodity developments, and so forth and so forth.
You talked a little bit about procurement analytics rather than spend analysis. I'm guessing that's deliberate. So I just wonder if you could share, you know, why you use that terminology, you know, and what's the difference in your mind?
Yeah, so it was by purpose, yes. So what we feel is that spend analytics is really too narrow definition, and it drives procurement to only look at their spend numbers, whereas they should be more looking at the opportunities that they can identify from their past spend, as well as prices. Mm-hmm. But they should also be looking at their payment terms, inbound inventories to get a grasp on the working capital implications. And furthermore, it's not only looking on the past, but also it's planning about the future. So you should be taking a look on and active managing your savings initiatives and really managing them from idea to cash, or making sure that the actions that you have done, they also get implemented and you get the value at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And then what you should be doing is also be looking at your future for a more systematic perspective. So actually forecasting your price development, your quantities, your spending, and then at the end of the day, not only looking at the spend, but looking at also what kind of implications that has for the company's profitability as well.
Yeah. And for anybody who's kind of listening who doesn't know Sievo, I actually came across you through the blog, through your website. And the reason why you really stood out to me was the culture. So I think it's something that, and maybe it's just my perception of culture, but the blog and the website really kind of exudes, I think, who your team are as personalities. And it's really refreshing to kind of get that insight. I think so many organizations kind of stand behind more of a corporate veil that, it's formal and serious. And not to say that you're not, but I just really appreciated that because it was so refreshing. And I think culture, just in my experience, culture is so important when it comes to selecting companies to work with. And oftentimes you select, and this is generally, it's not talking about spend analytics, but we do all of our due diligence to find a company to work with through the sourcing process, but you're never quite sure if there'll be a cultural fit until you start working together. And what I love is that you kind of put it all out there right at the beginning. So it's like either you like that or you don't like it, and you can make a choice and you can self-select almost, as opposed to wondering what it's going to be like to work with you, as soon as the contract gets signed.
Exactly. That's actually a very good point. I'm very happy that you found those things on our blog posts and on our websites and how do we communicate. We also feel that that's very one important aspect on the cultural fit between you and your clients to really establish a partnership there. And what I have actually seen recently is that quite a few companies in their RFPs, they are paying increasing amount of effort and trying to understand with who are they actually working with. Mm-hmm. So they invite people extensively, also the project teams and account managers and so forth. They invite them to participate to the RFP process, and they are doing interviews, and they are really trying to get a sense that who are the persons that I would actually be working with and what kind of culture they have and so forth. I don't know if you have seen any of that.
It's interesting. I haven't really. I mean, I saw it a little bit when I was in the procurement outsourcing space. So I was a service provider within procurement outsourcing. So, and I would see occasions when we would want, as part of the due diligence process, we'd want to bring in people who were the delivery managers and the to give insights into the level of people that they would be working with, that you would experience as a client. But it wasn't necessarily that those were the people who would support you and would support your account. And I think that I'm encouraged to hear it. I'm sure that some service providers don't like it and some service providers really embrace it. And that in itself is kind of a tell, isn't it, as to the kind of company that you'd be working with. And maybe some people don't really care about that. But I just see that everything that we do is a human to human. You can take away all the business side of things and the processes and the contracts and frameworks and playbooks and all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, we're all working human to human. And that's just so important to get a feel for what it's like to work with the other people.
Precise. I'm 100% with you on that. So I feel the same.
So when we think about procurement analytics, what I wanted to do today is just kind of understand kind of the art of the possible, because it's a topic that often gets talked about and I think sometimes gets misunderstood, or is either considered to be, well, that's easy, everybody should be doing it, to, well, I have so much complexity in my business that I am never going to understand my data, and everywhere in between.
Yep.
So what I thought we could do is talk through a few different examples of what you've seen in your work, and then I have some follow-up questions as you do that, because I want to kind of get into the how. How can people who are listening who may have that challenge, what can they actually do about increasing their results and getting more transparency into their data through more of a focus in procurement analytics?
Absolutely. So I think kind of before jumping into the examples directly, I think for us, to give a bit of background here, the key thing for the procurement analytics, or the base, what you actually start from, that's the spend analytics piece typically. And of course, as far as we have seen, companies typically they do have two big challenges on their spend analytics. So First thing is the data extraction. How do you get good and reliable data out of the data mesh that the companies have with multiple different ERPs, multiple different purchase processes, and you name it. And then the second challenge is on the classification. So when you have your data, how do you actually end up in having that data correctly categorized into your category structure? So most probably you relate to those, and you see the same things out there in the market. And I think those are the things that start actually building your foundation on top.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I see it far more often than I think that I expect to see it. And I'm not saying that because I think everybody should be doing a better job. That's not what I mean at all. It's the fact that the long known challenges and the challenges that a number of companies just haven't really been able to solve for yet. And it's not from the want of trying. It's hard, and yet it's so foundational. So and what
it is foundational, yeah.
And what I see is, either there could be a tool in place to do spend analytics, but it's not necessarily working the way it was supposed to work, or the data is coming in so many different ways that it's like a constant process to try and enrich that data. And it's a process that just takes so much time and effort and arms and legs that it's something that just quickly gets out of control. And then it's difficult to trust the data. And then the classification, I see the same, we have this data, but how do we make it actionable? And again, my experience is that it's keeping that up to date. So, I've done this a number of times. You do a one-time look at your spend, and you put so much effort into all the classifications till you get to a point where you're confident that at least it's representative. You can do something with the information, but it's all manual. And so the next time you run your spend report, you got to do that all over again, not just with the new spend, but also the old spend. And it becomes something that's just not sustainable.
Yeah, and that's good that you brought it up, because this is exactly the challenge that we also see. So you can actually do, if you do just put enough efforts in place, one-time effort, you can do whatever you want. But then if you really want to make it repeatable, if you really want to make it sustainable, then you actually need to something which is a bit more of an thought-through process of how things actually fit together.
Yeah.
And this is what we also feel that it's really the cornerstone of giving or providing good spend analytics in place. So you need to be able to make firstly the data extractions in such a way that they work in the exact same manner each and every single time. We have solution for that, which we embrace to our clients and saying that, hey, you don't need to be an IT expert to do data extracts. We provide you with a solution that it's just plug and play, and you get good quality data out from your ERPs and from your purchase systems. And then, of course, it's about the classification. How do you make sure that happens each and every single month in the same fashion? Everything that's actually out there classified already, it stays classified. And most importantly, if you want to do corrections, then you can actually do those corrections immediately and see the results. And here I would actually say you one story about the classifications, which you pointed out it very well, that you need to make it repeatable. And there you typically face a lot of challenges. Yeah. So we were doing a project with one of our current clients, and they were basically changing from another solution provider to us. And I remember that the IT category manager, she had huge challenges on getting the spend right with the old provider. She had a good example on AT&T. I believe they had something like 85 plus vendor numbers for AT&T, and I think a bit more than 100 different CL accounts used across the different ERPs for AT&T spend. And no matter what the IT category manager did or what kind of feedback she gave to the old solution provider, she just couldn't get AT&T correctly classified into her categories. What we do with our clients always as part of implementation is, because we want to really feel and know how they feel about the application and what kind of improvements they would like to do and so forth. So we do classification validation workshops. We went to the workshop with this IT category manager, and she was looking at the spend first time. First thing she did, AT&T, looking at, okay, all the AT&Ts, they are actually in my categories. Wow, this is amazing. Right. How could you do that thing? Had a discussion. She was so happy on this. But the best part is that 3 months after, when we had done a few data refreshes in between, she actually get back to us and send a personal email that, hey guys, thank you, this is great. You could not only do that one time on having the spend correct, but it actually stays there. It's there. It has been there now for 3 months, everything correct, and I can see what I actually wanted to see. Thank you. So you can actually do that. There are ways how you can make that happen.
So what are some of the keys to doing that then? Is it because if I'm sure it's doable, and I've seen the outputs where it works, but as a procurement leader listening to this who's maybe struggling with their spend data, and has some of the problems we talked about before, what can they do about it? How can they start to try and get more consistency in the data, and also have it so that it's actually, it's getting pulling the right data from the right places, reporting in the right way?
Precisely. I think the key word here is transparency. It's not only about being transparent on the end results, so seeing your spend and so forth, but it's also being transparent on the processes, meaning that you shouldn't hide kind of behind the fact that, yes, we don't have proper processes in place, and we can't rely on the data because it's crap. You shouldn't be looking at it in that way, but you should be looking at it in a way that, okay, we have these source systems, we do have these processes, and then kind of bucketing out or tabling out that which part of these processes that I have, which part of them actually gives me a good quality output, which part should I actually improve, and not only saying that I can't improve them, really doing actions to go out there and tackle those challenges already from the source perspective. So making sure that you get as good quality data from your systems as possible. That's kind of the first thing. So pay attention to the processes and always figure out if there is a way for you to improve, to get better quality data as an output of the processes that you run.
And a lot of that is from an experience of a project I'm working on right now. There's unintended, so people make decisions in terms of how they manage data far more downstream in the process. Even goes down to how a purchase requisition is written, to what information is required on an invoice, or how it's booked when an invoice comes in, how it's classified. And so a lot of it is going all the way through that process and figuring out how can we better capture that information, or how can a certain business or unit or a function who has a hand on the data at some point in that process before it even gets to us, what are some of the things that they're doing that maybe have unintended consequences that we can kind of work together to change the process so that the quality of the data actually improves as a source into a spend analytics tool, which then increases the output. Precisely,
exactly like that. And then, of course, what you also need to recognize is that you can't change all the processes. You can't make all the corners perfect. So you still need to have tools on top of that to handle those, to handle the cases which you cannot solve in the process. And of course, for that, you need to have tools where you can do classifications in a flexible and efficient manner. Of course, preferably supported with artificial intelligence on the machine learning side, so that the computer gives you as much inputs as possible on that. But most importantly for that, I think as well, you need to have a transparent process in place, meaning that you need to always know why certain spend is actually sitting somewhere. And if you want to do corrections for it, that you can do the corrections either by yourself or at least within a minimal lead time, so that you don't need to wait for 3 months or something to be corrected on your spend or whatever. So I think it's two things. It's about making sure that the underlying processes or the downstream processes are correct, and then having right tools and capabilities in place to act on top of things which you cannot change downstream.
You mentioned machine learning, which is something that piqued my interest. I was talking to a company last week, and we were talking specifically about spend analytics. And one of the things I was suggesting to them, they were having a struggle to get hold of their data and to really make sense of their spend data. And I taught them about machine learning and kind of I see that as being one of the key areas where I think machine learning can really make a difference within procurement. is to start, once things are classified, actually be able to, one, apply that to new spend that comes in. But what was really interesting to me is the idea of actually learning from decisions that are made by other companies who are classifying information in certain ways. And it's obviously all anonymized, but being able to apply that same logic when something that comes through another client, through their spend file, that looks very similar to, with, let's say, 99% or 99.5% potential accuracy. So you can actually quickly just go through new spend as well, because it's learning from decisions that others have made.
Absolutely so. And that's very much on our agenda as well. We call that procurement big data. And as part of that, this whole artificial intelligence, machine learning, not only utilizing the data that you have inside one company, but also utilizing the data for the other companies, whether that's classification decisions or whether that is providing payment term benchmarks or things of that nature. All of that clustered under the term procurement big data here.
Do you think that that's and I'm kind of going off at a tangent right now, but do you think that is really the future of procurement analytics?
I believe that's one part of the future for the procurement analytics. It's kind of, you can think about if you're running a marathon, for example, and you are running a marathon in 4 hours. If you don't know anything about anybody else, how are they doing? What are their times? If you do it this year in 4 hours, next year it's 3 hours and 55 minutes. So you are improving. That's for sure. So you know that I'm improving and I made better than last year. But what happens when you actually all of a sudden know that, okay, the others are doing that in 2 hours and 10 minutes?
Right.
Then all of a sudden you actually know that, so there is still some gap in between myself and the best of breed in this particular sports. Yeah. So it's definitely a way to go. You want this information for sure in order for you to benchmark yourself, your performance, and define that where do you actually want to focus on next. Yeah.
Do you even want to be running 2 hours, 10 minutes, or do you want to focus on somewhere else? But at least you know that's what the benchmark is.
Yeah, of course. You need to set your own baseline, own targets. At least if I would be setting my target on running a marathon even in 4 hours, I think that would be a stretch.
Yeah, I'd be happy. We talked about, so an organization, the example that you gave there was one that was struggling to get hold of their spend data. What about a company who has really good data, but they're wanting to, kind of bring more transparency to the business in terms of what they're doing and it's kind of the deliverables of procurement? How can they think about kind of using that data and taking it to the next level?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. And that's something that we feel it's also very, very important. It's not only to kind of use the procurement data and use your data inside procurement, but really use it to leverage and tell more about what procurement is doing for the other parts of the organization, especially finance. I think is typical stakeholder there. Yeah. So I'll give you an example. For example, a case ISS, which is one of our clients. So they are leading a facility service company with almost, or I think, a bit over even 500,000 employees globally. And they are running multiple ERPs system as well. So of course, all the kind of traditional challenges out there. But what really was a challenge for them is that they were doing the kind of standard procurement savings calculated on the Excel files and what kind of savings initiatives procurement has and what kind of savings and so forth. But the finance really didn't believe on the numbers. So finance was looking at the number. Okay, you saved 50 million or whatever is the number. But when I'm looking at my P&L, I can actually only see 10. So where did the remaining 40 go? And what ISS did, or what we did together with them, is that they took in use Sievo savings program management. So they are now tracking inside Sievo all their savings initiatives, putting in all the numbers, all the attachments of how the savings are calculated, and they are exposing those savings numbers to finance before they start reporting them as their savings. So finance always has a final say on whether I approve these savings or whether I want to somehow modify the calculations of the numbers behind. And So they are exposing all of this to finance. They are giving a complete transparency on their process, on all the initiatives, all the calculations, everything. And as a result, when finance gets this and gets involved in the process, and now finance considers Sievo as one single source of truth for the procurement savings, and they also buy the savings numbers. So they believe in what procurement actually reports.
So it's really tracking realized savings and taking away a lot of the, because you're right, one of the challenges I think we have is finance trusting our data. And again, that's not because we're trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes, particularly. It's just there's a lot of projections and forecasts that go into our spend reporting, and it's difficult for finance to actually track that to the bottom line, or at least track it into a place that they know it's been reinvested somewhere else.
Yeah, and then rather typically when procurement is looking at savings numbers, when you are doing your renegotiation of a contract, for example, what you are doing, you are of course comparing your price that you get now to the price that you paid previously. But then again, what finance is looking at, they are looking at the prices that you paid last year and the prices that you pay this year, because that's what eventually gets recorded in the P&L. So you need to be mindful also about these different views that procurement and finance might have when they are looking at the savings numbers.
So from a technical perspective, how are you actually connecting ultimately a payment, so an invoice is being paid, with the cost savings that should flow from the payment of that invoice?
Yeah, so we have we do the calculation of realized savings based on the spend data, so really based on the data from the ERPs.
Okay.
And then of course the key there is to start the extraction or do the extraction in a manner that also finance approve those, so that the numbers that first of all the spend number that you see is something that the finance also sees. And then the calculation itself, the algorithms on the background, it's really just the data crunching on calculating on what are the price movements, material by material, unit by unit, and supplier by supplier, and going to the line level, of course, and isolating out of that how did the price change from previous year, whether there were any currency impacts. So if you are buying in different currencies, how much that impacted your price, or if you have linked any commodity prices to your categories. How did those commodity prices fluctuate, and what's the impact on those on your price movement that you actually see at the end of the day? And so kind of this gets calculated automatically on top of the data from the ERPs. And then in the application, if you have your savings initiatives in place, it gets linked to the savings initiatives. So you can actually see that what kind of results you have as the work that you did.
So within a savings initiative, for example, there would be some logic that's determined as part of essentially signing off a sourcing project. So you finish your project, you have an element of, okay, how am I going to track the savings? Here's the methodology I'm going to use, and these are the calculations. And then those calculations are then essentially built into the tool, so it knows which data to extract and how to apply it. And is that
pretty much like this?
Is that like an invoice level? So it would go into line item detail.
That's an invoice. Yep, that's on an invoice line level calculation. So really taking all the details available out there from the ERP and making sure that the calculation happens on the ERP data, not just on the assumed quantities or assumed prices.
Yeah, and that's applied to direct and indirect materials and services as well. The same logic, right?
Yeah, same logic for both. And then, of course, there are variations upon it based on the data quality that you have, whether you have prices and quantities, or whether you only have spend information available and so forth. An important thing here as well, to align that methodology with the finance beforehand, so that everybody understands where do the numbers come from and what are the underlying assumptions.
So they're approving the savings methodology. So either you can have a set of savings methodologies, and let's say you have 8 different approved ways to calculate savings, and you're applying one of those to each of your projects, or on a project by project basis, you're getting approval from finance to say, yes, I agree that this is the way we want to track the savings on that project.
This is the correct way to go forward. Yeah, you are all approved.
I'm sure that by doing this, it decreases the savings that we're able to report, because it takes away. in most cases anyway, it takes away a lot of the estimates, and sometimes the estimates may be higher than what the reality is. I mean, other times, if you're in a growing company, and maybe it's a category where demand ends up being a lot higher than expected, maybe it's on the flip side. But my assumption would be generally that it reduces the number that we can report on. Is that something you see?
It really depends, I think, as you said. It's also a flip side of it. So in certain categories, in certain situations, you actually can achieve more because what ends up happening is that you actually buy more than what you anticipated, and then you get potentially even lower prices. So at least your savings is increased because you just bought more than what you budgeted for. So there are both sides of it. I think in certain cases, yes, you might see a reduction of your savings number. But then again, although you see a reduction of your savings number, it doesn't kind of take out the value of the procurement. It's quite the contrary, because then the finance actually believes in those numbers. So you don't get into a debate always that now you are reporting 50, but we see 10.
Yes.
So we don't believe in your numbers. But then if you can say that, yes, we are reporting 30, and everybody believes in that 30, so you all of a sudden you actually get a credibility. You get numbers that are trusted for. So you are even more appreciated, although the number is smaller than what you previously tried to communicate and nobody believed in. So I think transparency here, again, is a key, and having a trust on the number, not that much about whether it's 50 or 40 or whatever is the correct number there.
Yeah, and that's where my thinking was as well, is that, which is kind of where I was leading the question, because while we may show that we've saved less money, there's actually 100% trust in that number. And so it's a number we can stand behind as opposed to people questioning it. So while the headline number may be lower, it's actually more, you can actually see the impact that we're making as opposed to people questioning and arguing. And so it has a bigger impact. And it's something that's hard for us because we don't necessarily want to show a lower number to say either, hey, my reporting in the past hasn't been great or it hasn't been accurate, or I'm actually having less impact than I committed to have. So it's a difficult one to actually go out there. I think it takes some courage to be open to that happening. But I think on the flip side, like we said, it's actually a positive because it's data that can be trusted at this point. And there's never any questioning of what value do these guys really provide for me?
Yeah, and I think it's, of course, goes down to the whole thing of transparency here. I think it's always difficult, or it potentially at least might be difficult to start with if you haven't been able to, or if you haven't been transparent on the numbers before. So there might be a bit of a barrier to actually start that. But when you are there, then I think it's a better place to be in for everybody. So
it's probably easier to get there when you haven't really, as part of a transformation, as opposed to doing it as just a regular cost. Oh, I'm going to implement this new way of tracking savings. But I think that I've been involved in situations too where we've transitioned the client over to realized savings, and it just has such a difference in the conversations. So I would encourage anybody to think about it for sure, because while there's more complexity that goes on behind the scenes, it changes the level of the conversation that you have with finance and with some stakeholders too. And so the last thing I wanted to touch on in terms of kind of use cases for procurement analytics was predictive spend analytics. So I've talked about predictive spend analytics on the show before. I've read a lot about predictive spend analytics just in the procurement press over the last 2 years or so that I've been doing the show. But I still feel as though while everybody kind of agrees, wouldn't predictive spend analytics be wonderful? Very few are actually at the point where they're actually able to make it happen. And so I wonder if you could share just kind of a case study of an organization who is able to use predictive spend analytics, kind of what they've done to enable that and some of the benefits that it brings. Because I want to just share that there are people out there that are doing it. It's not something that's conceptual. So it is there as something to consider. Once, I think it's kind of the next step, right? Once you feel like you really have a great handle on your data, it's what can I do next? How can I take it into the future?
Exactly. So it's definitely there. It's it's tangible. So it's you can actually do that. So when you master your past spend and past performance, then you can start thinking about what will actually happen in the future. And I'll give you a case example from Kelloggs, and you can also take a look from our website. So we have the case studies there. So feel free to read more on that. And so what we're actually doing there, first of all, we are focused in this particular case more often direct spending, so direct as well as packaging goods that they buy. And what they are doing, they are really heavily, it's a finance-focused exercise. So they are focused on predicting a future PPV, so purchase price variance, across their packaging categories, raw material categories, as well as the contract manufacturing. And they were doing kind of a labor-sum data crunching exercise before with an Excel file or with multiple Excel files. So collecting price inputs from category buyers, global category buyers, and local category buyers out there in the different regions, and then consolidating each and every single month all the price inputs from the category managers to one single Excel file, and then did analysis on how did my view from previous month to this month for this full year actually changed. And what we are doing now together with them, we are providing a platform where they can actually go in online. They can see a platform where they can forecast, so they can see all their prices across different materials that they have, different plants, different regions, different suppliers, and they can feed in their own forecast. That what do they believe that is going to happen in the future? The application gives you, or we give them a baseline. So we give them that, this is what's there in the tool, that what's going to happen in the future, but they can then adjust it as they see fit. So, for example, if they know that they are going to negotiate contracts at a certain point of time of year, they can already feed in the impact of that contract price change.
Yes, so they can do scenario planning and modeling.
Exactly. And they can basically then go in and they can do comparison of, how did my previous forecast and this forecast that now did, how do those actually differ from each other? And most importantly, they can see whether the difference comes from the fact that the prices have changed, the currency rates have changed, or whether the underlying quantities, the forecasted quantities have changed. So they can really deep dive into the causes of the deviation of the variance, and they can identify that on one single material, one single plant level, even if an issue.
So what are the types of data inputs that are actually needed to be able to actually pull all this together?
From the data input perspective, fairly simple and straightforward. You need prices, you need quantities, as well as then you need currency rates. And if you wish, if you want to include commodity prices there, then of course you need your commodity indices. So that's pretty much about it. Of course, the complexity lies in the fact that you have tens of thousands of materials where you actually would need these data points. So you need to have a system that actually gives you proposals to start with, so that you don't each and every single month need to start from an empty canvas and try to figure out what my prices actually are.
Well, all right, JP, I know that time is unfortunately running out on us, and so I have to start wrapping up the conversation. But what I wanted to ask is, well, first of all, I actually wanted to thank you for joining me, because I know, as you mentioned right at the beginning, it's a pretty hectic time for you right now in working on the transition of moving the family from Helsinki over to Chicago. So I'm sure that you have other things that you could certainly have been dedicating your time to today to help with that move, rather than jumping on a call with me. So first of all, thank you. Thank you. As you think about this time next week, you'll be settled. Well, I don't want to say settled. You'll be in your new home. You'll be getting used to being finally in one place, I think. What are some of the things you're going to be focusing on for the first couple of months for Sievo in the States? Yeah,
so first thing for me to do is hiring. So we are here to hire Americans.
Yeah.
That's the first task. I have taken a bit of a start of that already. So we are growing the team in Chicago. We have already done a few recruits, but that's definitely something I will be focused on very heavily next. So making sure that we have the talent, we have the team to support our growth in the US.
Yeah.
And I have also actually written a blog about it. So there is a blog published on our webpage. about hiring in US, about differences on that between Finland and US and so forth. So might be a good one to read if you have time.
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll link up to that in the show notes. So what I will do is for our discussion today, once it goes live, I'll actually post the notes from the conversation, and I'll put a link to the blog post that talks about your hiring in the States, and I'll put that at artofprocurement.com/Sievo. That's artofprocurement.com/Sievo, which is SIEVO. And listeners can check that out. So one last time, JP, thank you again for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Phil, for your time as well. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.